All right. Welcome back to the Foxhole. AfterShoX 040, Season 2, Episode 8. Quarter of the way through Season 2. How about that? As the great late Mel Allen once said. Yeah, as always, like and subscribe to FTINFX Media's YouTube channel. We can use the help of the algorithm. Help a brother out. Tell your friends too. You won't get spammed or anything, and you're doing a good thing being a friend of the Foxhole. So give us some help there. If you want to contact us to be on the show, or just say, hey, FTINFX@gmail.com, or call the hotline 541 525 0896. Always shout out to Sony. Shout out to Rode, Zoom, Google, Potenzic, all the wonderful tools that I use. You know, I'm not getting anything for saying this, but hey, I always give them a shout out because they make podcasting and doing web series a hell of a lot easier. All right, enough of the la. Oh my God, hold on a second here. Tell you a quick story. So this is the second time I'm doing this today. Did it earlier, but I somehow hit the wrong setting, and I had like an hour of slow motion footage, which, would be great for B-roll, but you can't actually use it, for anything else. And so that's why I'm doing this again. And of course, I'm a little bit flustered here, but hopefully this comes out right. So with that in mind, AfterShoX 40 coming at you right now. Okay, we're going to open up with a segment that we're going to call Hoop Dreams and Brutal Realities. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, I'm just watching here as the Sixers have ousted Orlando, completing what has been a wild week for them. Yeah, well, at least they get another shot. Miami's done with. But right in round one, we're going to have KD and LeBron. Not Warriors, but Rockets and Lakers. And then coming up here momentarily, we're going to have the Clippers and Warriors. And I know I've harped on this before, and, I'll harp on it again. We always have a tendency to revisit things. But I just got to thinking, right? You got KD and LeBron, and then Chef Curry and Kawhi Leonard. What is this, 2015 to 2019 era? Remember the old Looney Tunes commercials where, they'd grab the long cane and yank your ass off the friggin' stage? Hey, I'm a boomer, so you know me. When it comes to ageism, I ain't got no problems if you got it. And then, like I said, these guys have played forever, but I just think the emphasis on them and how the networks are still salivating when you do have people who've already taken the baton. And we're going to hopefully see that in these playoffs. And it just makes you wonder. I know Commissioner Silver is saying that, the viewership has, doubled this year in spite of it, the product being all over different platforms. And, as I keep saying, when they say the numbers have increased, do you really believe that, given how much the books are being cooked with everything in that realm, and others as well, really? But, this is just a rant of one more rant of why we probably need to let go of this era. Give these guys the flowers for what they've accomplished. I know some people, in the case of Chef Curry, that he probably changed the game for the worse. I don't know where I sit in that interesting argument. LeBron, I don't know. One of the more intriguing figures ever to be in the NBA. Let's put it that way. KD, there was a lot of what ifs and coulds there in terms of his career, so we've talked about on this platform. And then you've got Kawhi, kind of the same thing, all fairly decorated as far as, like I said, accomplishments are concerned. But it's almost time to leave it at that. I almost feel like, remember Peyton Manning at the end of his career when the piano was truly on his back? I kind of feel that way watching these guys, even though LeBron, some nights he kind of shows he's still got it, but the piano is not far. It's in the next room most of the time. Okay, let's move on. Charles Barkley making all kinds of news. Charles, he's never afraid to speak his mind. And a lot of times he's probably speaking out of turn, commenting on things that are probably slightly out of his weight class, but because he's Chuck, hey, Kenny, I'm going to say whatever I want. We get all that. And I got to say, there's two things that he came out and said this past week where, hey, Chuck ain't lying. One of them, people bitching and moaning about the 65 game threshold. And him basically telling you all that are whining players, media, shut the hell up. As we're always saying on this platform, that certain things, if you're going to get the desired change, there is a little hurt. And, and I don't know how much hurt this is when you're making the kind of money that they are making, which is really ridiculous. Like I said, you got Peyton Pritchard just south of $40 million. And while this is not disparaging Peyton Pritchard one bit, the fact that you all are making $40 million and load managing and all this kind of stuff, it's disrespectful to the game and the fans. And therefore, if you can't play 65 games, you shouldn't get an award. Simple as that. And, Chuck wasn't wrong also when he brought up the shenanigans of last weekend. Friday night and Sunday, the last day, all these people sitting out. And as we've brought up on this platform many times, this shit ain't cheap. And this is supposed to be a wonderful moment, if it's families or you're taking your specials other out to an NBA game. It should be cool, right? You get to see the stars and things like that. And, can you imagine Kobe, even when the Lakers sucked, he's out there playing in games. Jordan put up good numbers when he was with the Wiz. So, yeah, it's all crying about the 65 game threshold and Charles speaking out about this complete disrespect of the game, especially when you're making that kind of money. He's spot on, 8,000%. You rock on, brother, as far as that goes. Isn't going to, it's going to fall on deaf ears with this crowd because, the culture will always have these guys back. But just because the culture has your back doesn't mean it's right. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay. Then we've got what we'll call Dr. Dre. Yeah. And this is a story of two docs, really. Doc Roberts, manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers, the two-time defending champions, and then Glenn Doc Rivers, formerly of the Milwaukee Bucks, coached the Boston Celtics to a championship over my Lakers in 2008. Now, it's interesting when I say Dr. Dre, because, back in 21, 22, and pretty right after the Dodgers won the Cracker Jack championship, but after that continued their, long established underachieving of the postseason. People were saying after the Cracker Jack championship, questioning Dave's Hall of Fame credentials. And just saying, it's kind of mediocre, kind of mid, just has been in a good team, all blah, blah, blah. Flip over to Glenn Doc Rivers, who, had 3 Hall of Famers in Boston, won a championship, went to another one, and then since then has had a lot of, we're going to say colossal failures. The Clippers, all that talent, nothing. Goes to Philly, part of the process with my man Josh Harris, nothing. Takes over a Milwaukee team that was pretty solid. Was coming off of a champion, shortly removed from winning a championship. And they are absolute poo. It's almost in reverse. It's like Dave Roberts. We were like, well, he shouldn't get in the Hall of Fame. Now, after going back to back, and then the thing is, like Doc in the front end, you got a ridiculous team. Who's not going to win rings with Mookie, Freddie, Shohei, Yamamoto, on and on and on? I mean, they don't even have to be hitting, all cylinders. I'll talk more about the Dodgers later, but that's just looking at Dr. Dre, with Doc Roberts and Doc Rivers. It's just so interesting, the weird trajectories as far as their path. I mean, because, the Basketball Hall of Fame, we know, you get something in 8th grade and you get into the Naismith Hall of Fame. We totally know all about that. But on the other hand, people were questioning Doc Roberts, whether he should be a Hall of Famer in spite of putting up these numbers. And now with the 3 championships, he blasted the doors down. Glenn will get in the Hall of Fame, based on the wins, but there was just all these disappointments when it comes to him. All those 3-1 leads blown, all those 3-2 leads blown, all these losses he has, it's way up there in spite of the wins. So it just look at his Hall of Fame, being hollow, where somehow you can make some arguments about Doc Roberts, but at the end, we're just like, oh yeah, we're cool with that. Okay. Another one here. Who faces the biggest offseason here? There was a lot of people, looking ahead to the 26-27 season. LeBron's future is going to be a big question as far as what's next. But I got to ask these 2 players. Because, coming out, they were labeled as generational. Both have had their issues. Anthony Davis and obviously Zion. And I'm wondering who is going to have to reflect more in the offseason and who has more at stake coming into next year. And I thought about this for a second. I think with AD, his glass man issues are known. But I think going to Washington, where they're kind of rolling the dice, they kind of know, hey, if we get 50 or 60 games out of him, what we're trying to build, great. Whereas with Zion, with everything that's gone wrong with that franchise, and, he's a big part of why that franchise is currently at the waste treatment facility. I think it's really on him. He even said it, that he has a lot of reflection to do in the off season. And, he's absolutely right in that regard. And I do feel that, there's going to be a bigger onus on him because they really need to do something to rebound that franchise. I mean, the Wizards, they're already in there. They're going to go up. They've been taking advantage of being in the lottery, made some trades to get Trae Young, and they got AD. So I just feel like, hey, they're rolling the dice. We'll see what happens. Whereas I think there's a real crisis in New Orleans. Okay, let me close this out, this segment at least. I got to talk about the Queens of the Court. Yeah, that league that goes out of its way to ensure that it will remain one of the most unlikable leagues with the most unlikable set of characters in all of sport. Yeah, you thought the United States women's national team, when they had Rapinoe and all those wackos, was unlikable. The WNBA says hold my keg, okay? And this week, it did be no different. The more Caitlin Clark shenanigans, everybody getting the bag. Well, not everybody, but, Kelsey Plum, taking less money, not only to help the Sparks be, competitive, but also to keep out, not crossing the $1 million threshold. So Gavin Newsom and his, honchos can't take all that money. Aja Wilson signing a big deal. But it's just interesting because the draft, which, Miss Flood was taken first, the lady from Connecticut who happens to be dating Paige Buchers. Now, I don't want to get into the controversial stuff that guys like Whitlock and Coach JB and others, I don't need to go there. But it is interesting that the league is trying to sort of make sure we stick to our alphabet mafia roots. We don't want to push this whole thing with that Caitlin Clark and, Sophie and all the, those girls that are bringing the simps to the table and actually getting them paid. We need to celebrate this. And it's going to be interesting once they start playing. And if Caitlin Clark can stay healthy, you can already see, and I said this from day one, the cultural war that's happening. Well, not day one of this podcast, but day one of watching the Caitlin Clark effect. You can go back and, check the tape. But yeah, I saw this cultural war, which is kind of a weird reflection of what goes on in our society. You can see it like a mile away. And it's playing out. Like I keep saying, pennies from heaven as far as all you guys like Keep the Vision, the Ben Daniels, and obviously the legendary Rachel DeMita, and so many others. Pennies from heaven, because people like me come to, eat that content up. I mean, for me, I just laugh, especially with a lot of the simps out there. And, the Caitlin Clark Brigade, they're that hive is as fierce as the Swifties, man. All right, folks, we've been rocking and rolling with this segment. When we come back, we will rock a little bit more momentarily. See you shortly. Enjoy the drone show. All right, then. Welcome back to the Foxhole. Your faithful host, Ken Harlan here. Ice cold chilling like Kavicha Karvich-Skelia. Yeah. I'm repping hard. We'll talk about that in the next segment. We guarantee that. Like I said, like and subscribe. The FTI and FX Media's YouTube channel. Brother needs some help there. Get the algorithm going. Really do some cool stuff up in this B. Just mentioned about the 76ers handling their business. Orlando, boy, what a week it was. We'll cover more about that episode 310. We'll do that either Friday or Saturday. I'm not sure yet. Never know how these weeks evolve in terms of being able to create content and get it out there to you. Okay, so this segment is going to be called That's Entertainment. Until it isn't. That's right. Let's talk a little Dirty Diana. If you follow sports, which if you watch AfterShoX or listen to Fox Running in the Foxhole, that's what we do, right? It means you follow sports, and you probably know all the stuff that's going on with Diana Rossini. I had mentioned it last week on episode 310 of FTI and FX. Excuse me. Woo. I didn't mean to rock and roll like that. Okay, so Diana and Mike Vrabel, the coach of the New England Patriots, Vrabes, he's a ledge, considered one of the greatest coaches that was also a player, arguably. They got caught holding hands and, also doing other stuff at a couple's retreat. She claimed she was hanging out with her homies, but come on, with both of them. You don't go there. But, whatever. It's consenting adults. The problem for her was that, funny people felt like her integrity can't be trusted now. What her husband might be going through, or if rapes his wife, nobody gives a shit about that. That's just, collateral damage. But, for me, it's the double standard. And this is like one of the rare times you'll ever hear me agree with the Jamel Hills and Michelle Beatles, who've come to Diana's defense. But the double standard, right? Braves isn't getting shamed for, what his ethical problems or even being a family man. And too often in this thing, we just can't wait to shame somebody, right? Especially females. You know, right? Even though there's probably as many male teachers as female teachers that are, plucking the fruit from the tree they shouldn't be. But what do you see in the New York Post? At least 6 times a week, it's always the females. Because we just gotta shame them. Our women have to be virtuous. They can't be out getting their freak on. And if they are, well, shit, we're gonna grab the pitchforks and the torches and tear you down. I mean, I don't know. Rossini's explanation of it, whatever. I guess like, okay, you kind of were basically saying, yeah, I was doing it, I was doing the but it's an O. And I feel, in the families, it's all a sorted mess. It's a double standard, and I have to agree, with some of the folks coming to her defense. It's 2 consenting adults, tabloid stuff, but coming down on her. The ethical thing is hard to get past. I will concede that. It's probably best to walk away. And I said it last week. She's going to end up having some kind of podcast. It's going to be a smash because there's going to be some people. The simps are going to go to her because she does exude a lot of sexuality. And there'll be other people that'll come to her defense. She's probably going to be able to achieve what Joy Taylor, Molly Quirm, and Jamel Hill, for that matter, can't really, I mean, Jamel Hill stays relevant by race baiting, but what have you heard from Joy or Molly lately? Nothing, so anyway, let me move on from that. I know it's crazy, though, how that story got legs and just basically torched, right, her lofty perch that she was building over the last decade. But, I just kind of saw some warning signs I thought might get her in trouble in the long run, just saying. The NFL winning its collusion case, and this happened about the quarterbacks after the Deshaun Watson deal, pretty much scared the crap out of people when it comes to guaranteed money. Go get that money. Is that just another sign of this Teflon coating I've been speaking about? The league is just kind of so big that, it's almost beyond reproach. And even if it is reproach, it's probably going to be a slap on the wrist because it makes so much money. The idea that this product is going to, in, media rights deals, or, as I said last week, $16 billion. It makes too much money for people to we're going to punish these guys. I mean, like I said, you found, I don't even know what the credentials of these people that were the arbiters for this. I don't know. But I got to wonder. I'm like going, so the NFL, I have a hard time thinking they're not guilty when it comes to any type of collusion. But it's just one more sign of this league's insane, power, right? And its sphere of influence. And there's that antitrust case that's coming up with streaming. But it's like, I think in the end, how the NFL's about to get its due. I'm like, no, they're not. If anything, they'll be forced to put more games on linear channels, maybe pay a fine, do the Bart Simpson thing and, write on the chalkboard 100 times, but I am sorry for being a monopoly. And then it's big to making that money. Am I lying? Okay, here's another one to chew on. Let's go on campus here real quick. Interesting stuff coming out of Boulder. So yeah, it means, I'm talking Boulder because all roads, I said, for content creators, clicks and hits emanate out of Boulder and Cleveland, where the Shadur sexuals and the Dion sexuals, right, all their brainwaves are tied into that. And, so Colorado had its spring game here, I think it was last week. And it's like for the 4th year, the attendance decreases. Now, why is that significant to Ken right now? Well, the culture. It was the culture's team, Black America's team. Rock star rappers and all this kind of stuff. And when the product fails to meet expectations, people don't care. I always thought spring games were silly anyways. People that just need something to do and just get their fix on, like here in Eugene. But it become kind of an event, in the beginning. But now that people have kind of seen, some of the hollowness of this Buffalo program, where the fact that, like I said last week about Dion trying to, build culture, but the truth is it's more of a reflection of him being butthurt that somebody would have the audacity to go somewhere else and talk bad about him in the program. The kid that said, "Hey, I got more coaching in 30 minutes here than the whole time I was in Boulder." And we know how thin-skinned Mr. Sanders is. Especially when you've got a whole wall of sycophants and Deion Sims are like telling him how great he is and how he walks on water. That you're seeing cracks in this, Boulder, Buffalo edifice, I should say. I'm not surprised by it, but it is interesting. It is unraveling. Are they fire him? No, because as the culture will always tell you, well, what were they before he got there? The fact that he brings sheen to that program, even when it's poo, that's probably worth it for the folks in Boulder, I guess. I think we'll see more if they suck in 2026. Yeah. Okay, what else do I got here? This is not good. Speaking of Colorado, and, the results came back from Dominique Ponder's crash, and it turns out his BAC was, I think, 167, but anyways, twice the legal limit. And I just got to thinking, Ted Ginn Jr. last week, coach of the Columbus Aviators of the UFL, getting a DUI the night before a frigging game. The whole thing, with Mr. Bain down in Miami being in that accident that I guess got covered up 24 where the girl ended up dying. I don't think there's alcohol that played a major factor in that, or at least so it's said. I don't know what to believe anything anymore. Where I'm going with this is, Ted Ginn Jr., you had a game the next night and you're getting your heat on. One, call it Uber, folks. Now, I'm not sitting here trying to be high and mighty because some of my friends drink and drive and I ride with them. As opposed to if I really, put my money where my mouth is, I'd tell them to shut the F up and get an Uber and we'll go get the car in the morning. And a lot of times I don't. So I'm not sitting here. But the thing is, my friends don't have NIL money. My friends don't have a coaching salary money or entertainers money. I'm not condoning it. It's a no-no. Yes, indeed. But you folks that have the resources, right, and I'm sure a lot of these organizations you belong to, or even schools, have a drive service. Okay, maybe you get a little embarrassment for being lit. But, who knows what's going to happen to Ted Ginn, this Ponder kid. He lost his life. Girl, I don't know what the details are, so I don't want to overstate my boundaries when it comes to the case with Bain. Right, but it's just, when are we going to start learning from these mistakes? Why does this reel have to complete itself, completely, repeat over and over? It's ridiculous at this point. And especially, I don't know, or you folks out there, and maybe nobody listens, I don't know, but it's disheartening. Okay, lastly on this, this is entertainment till it isn't. Yeah, well, how about the UFL expansion? This is versus, the NBA, which it looks like is going to do it with Seattle and Las Vegas. And, MLB is possible. But the UFL, I'm now hearing Oklahoma City's pretty much in for 2028. And I just got to thinking, because, I get all kinds of weird stuff in my feeds from time to time. And there was this, it was a football page. And they were talking about when the CFL, expanded, at a time to some North American cities, trying to like build a following here. And I was in Las Vegas at the time, the team called the Las Vegas Posse. He practiced at UNLV, played at Sam Boyd. Tamarick Vanover, that Tamarick Vanover actually played on that particular team before going to the NFL, where he was kind of a bust. Point being is, great idea just because you could try it, but it wasn't, because it didn't catch on, and all the south of the border presence disappeared. Just like the Edmonton Eskimos name, right? So it isn't now the Elks. But I look at the UFL and just go, can you get to a cult following? And I guess, St. Louis does pretty good. But, I've seen DC Defender games, because since I'm a Redskins fan, I'm always curious to see how many Commanders fans are in the stands. And I look at Audi, where DC United plays, and a lot of empty seats there. I'm sure, I don't believe anything TV-wise, right, because everybody's cooking the books. But I'm just thinking, can you get to a cult status first, right, as opposed to expanding? Because there's something about, as we've talked about, spring football. It never takes hold here. There's a lot of things going on this time of the year. But I just say, just because you can, doesn't mean you should, right? Wow. I mean, the NBA, and I totally get that. That's long overdue. I think the NBA has gotten this product to a point where, a lot of these bad matchups just, a couple of years ago, you're seeing less of that. I mean, look at Charlotte last night, Charlotte and Miami, Charlotte knocking Miami out of the playoffs, right? That they've all of a sudden become, Knipple and obviously L Ball, they've become something that's worth actually watching. MLB, I think there could. I think there's room for it. But UFL, come on. British Petroleum, as we say. Okay, when we come back, we will mix up something else. The foxhole. You know how we do, yo. Be back momentarily. All right. Welcome back to the Foxhole. Your favorite host, Kid Harlan here. AfterShoX 040. So it's season 2, episode 8. Quarter of the way through season 2. Isn't that crazy? Like I said earlier, we're burning through season 10 of FTI and FX. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think SJ gets down, supposed to drop an episode one of these days whenever she gets around to editing it. But, she's really busy with all sorts of things. So you'll see that whenever. I'll try to give a shout out whenever that drops. We like her, so, it is what it is. Okay, so we're going to call this segment 58 Days and No One Really Knows Where the Road Leads. And I was watching First Things First for the first time, and it's been a hot minute. I kind of find myself like a lot of people, watching the content on the interwebs, which is a little bit more unfiltered, and it just different perspectives. Obviously I'll go watch Colin and First Things First because they do have quality guests. I mean, they had the Giants GM talking about the draft earlier, and then Colin, and First Things First, they actually had Dax McCarty, talking some United States men's prospects and talking about Pulisic and Gio Reyna again and again. So anyways, this is a soccer theme segment. Some people are like, oh, good grip, he's going to talk soccer again. Hey, what can I tell you, man? So let me start with, my UCL reaction, because it was a big week for UEFA Champions League. I think that's probably, one of the most respected Champions Leagues on the planet, right? As far as Europeans and that arrogance go. And, the best players are in Europe for the most part. Anyway, this is big, so we're now at the quarterfinals. And so let's go through this real quickly. Barcelona getting knocked out by their La Liga, rival, Atletico Madrid, the man in black and Mr. Simeone. That's big stuff. All this talk about Yamal and Rafinha and Rashford and blah, blah, blah. And your asses are going to be on the sofa watching the semifinal. Fans of the Blue Ghana, not too pleased. And the internet, letting them have it. Not a good run for Spain in this particular edition of the Champions League. But more of that. And then we hop all the way over to Liverpool, the Anfield, PSG. We're always talking about the badge, yo. Always talking about the badge, man. That was a hell of a match. Hell of a two-way tie, really, even though it ends up PSG 4-0 in aggregate. Liverpool made them work for it. They definitely were better in the second fixture at Anfield than they were at the Parc des Princes, but it was still a hard-fought contest, even though PSG was able to secure clean sheets in both matchups. My mad respect to Liverpool. Tough break for Hugo Eteke, former PSG guy who blew out his Achilles in the first half. That was brutal. But, in the end, PSG had too much quality. It was Salah trying to make something happen coming off the bench. It just didn't there. We'll have to see where his future lies. And today, obviously, Los Blancos and Real Madrid going to the Allianz to face Bayern Munich in Munich, obviously. What a heavyweight bout that was. Good grief. They were just going at it in the first half, dropping down goals. I was just sitting there like, wow, this is, right, some Hagler Hearns shit going on there. And then, of course, Camavinga has to be an asshat and get a red card, which pretty much sunk Los Blancos. Yeah, Bayern gets 2 late goals and ends up winning the tie. Kylian Mbappe, who left Paris because he needed to fulfill his boyhood dream, even though you grew up in the Paris suburbs and claimed you were a PSG fan, but your boyhood dream was to play for Real Madrid. My song, well, PIL, the song, this is what you want, this is what you get, this is what you want, this is what you get. And now you're 0 for 2. PSG, after you left, wins the title. Could win another one. Never has looked better. If you have all the Madristas screaming and yelling. That's not all Kai's fault, but it is an incredible irony. A delicious irony, especially when you know the kind of shenanigans he put our club through. And, it is what it is. You wanted to be in Madrid, you got to deliver. And so far, your teams have it. But it's not all on Mbappe. But I'm not going to sit here and lie, and pretend like I have compassion for him. I don't. Straight up. All right. Let me move on from that. What else do they have here? Yeah, Arsenal taking out Sporting. That was a hard-fought two-way. 1-0 aggregate says all you need to know. So Arsenal's dream season is still in place. Sporting had a chance. Tougher out. I knew that was going to be a tough out. So, but yeah. So there you go. Bayern PSG rematch of the 2020 final. Ooh, yeah. And then you've got the man in black and Atletico Madrid. I love it. I love it. Still can't believe Barcelona, though, just being toast. But yeah. But Arsenal and Atletico, that should be, tasty. Kind of crazy. Somebody said today, God, football is so much more interesting when Britain and Spain are mostly locked out. But they're not, because of Arsenal and Atletico. So anyway, Javier Marciano resigns at Inter Miami 4 months removed from winning the MLS Cup. It's interesting. Now, first things first, also, they had David Beckham, giving a talk from his new palace. And, this is, Marciano is another reason why soccer is so intriguing, right? Because, people get amnesia, basically. You could win a championship and then a bad run of form, and your ass is out the door. And it's not that Inter Miami has been dog crap, but I know they've got some lofty aspirations after winning the MLS Cup last year. But I think there's a sting of getting knocked out of CONCACAF by Nashville, who, by the way, took out Club America last night. Right? And CONCACAF Champions Cup. But yeah, and they've had a series of draws and stuff. And so I don't know exactly what's going on there, but it's just so the beautiful game life. When 4 months removed after winning a cup, and it's just something that doesn't feel right. I don't know if it was mutual, his decision. Beckham made it seem that, but do we really believe that? Okay, I've been talking about the Spurs, over there, not San Antonio, but the North London Spurs, Tottenham. Wow. This whole thing of them being relegated, I think it's going to happen. I do believe it's going to happen. And I'm just trying to think, because I got a good friend that I grew up with, I've mentioned, many times. Should get him on here and talk to him, or at least get his thoughts on a club that big. I was trying to think of this earlier when I tried to tape this earlier. This to me is like the equivalent of, I'm trying to think of a team that, okay, that would be something. I said the Giants earlier, but I'm going to go maybe with the Dolphins, right? It'd be like the Dolphins getting relegated. A brand that's got history, a major player. I wouldn't say, the upper echelon, but a solid franchise. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think with Mr. Khan, obviously owns the Jaguars as well. Yeah, if they get knocked down, they won't stay there. Like, Blackburn Rovers, which is a team I kind of follow out of the corner of my eye for years. They won the Premier League in '95. And after they got relegated, at one point they had fallen even down to League One. But they, for whatever reason, they're a shell of themselves. And even, Leicester City, who won, 2015, I believe it is, they've ping-ponged back and forth between the Championship and the Premier. So I don't see that happening to the Spurs, but you gotta wonder the effect it will have on the fans, the balance sheet, so many things in play here as they are looking down the barrel of relegation. And right now, I can't see how they are not relegated at the end of the day, which is a crazy story to me. Another interesting story out there, speaking of CONCACAF Champions Cup, the winding road of LAFC. Yeah, I know, we're talking about my teams a little bit too much today, but hey, when they make news, I get to talk about them. And LAFC didn't have an easy task. They scored 3 goals last week in South LA playing Cruz Azul. You're right, of Liga MX, and we went 3-0. I was like going, oh man, I'm kind of nervous about this. And sure enough, LAFC goes down to Puebla, 7,000 feet. And it was a hard-fought match. But in the end, LAFC was like 1-1, so they ended up winning 4-1 in aggregate, knocking out the defending CONCACAF champions, CONCACAF Cup champions. They knocked them out. And I'm sitting there like going, well, okay, this is what LAFC has really strived from day one. Kind of like PSG on a smaller scale, but lofty ambitions. And it's kind of interesting to see this kind of winding road because it's like funny. They lost on Saturday, first time they conceded. This is in league play. They were up in Portland. I should have been there, but I'm glad I wasn't because of how it turned out. Even though it was our LAFC 2 squad, basically with Bwanga out there and Tafari. Yeah, and losing that way at the death kind of sucked because I said to, friends of the show, Lee and Adam, to my Facebook post, I said, yeah, it sucks losing a game that way, but if they get the desired result in Mexico, that loss will be a minor footnote in the bigger picture. That's what happened. And so now, LAFC moves on, and maybe they can join the Sounders and become the second team to win the CONCACAF Cup from MLS. Time will tell. Good to see the the U.S. Open Cup, couple of cup sets as far as lower squads knocking out MLS squads. I'll talk more about that on episode 310 when I have time to unpack it. Yeah, cool stuff, huh? Last one for this soccer theme segment. One of the things I think is interesting. So right now, the U.S. national women's team, the United States women's national team, they're in camp. They've already played 2 friendlies with Japan, and I think there's another one like on Friday or something like that. But it's kind of interesting how, since they've toned down their act as far as activism goes, I think their popularity in a weird way has decreased, even though they're much more, I don't know, desirable, much more, it seems like, approachable and are not, trying to be divisive. I don't think they're as popular as they once were. And that is another one of these weird things about 2026, just, being upside down and the gift that keeps on giving, because this is something I'm going to continue to really keep an eye on because, they're kind of, the bellwether when it comes to, the USSF teams that actually can win, major competitions. Obviously, we've talked plenty about the men and their interesting journey, but I just find that crazy that, in my opinion, what do you all think? You tell me, ftinfx@gmail.com. What do you think is the reason? Or maybe I'm just overreacting to certain things. I don't know. You tell me. Do I got anything else? Okay. When we come back, we will do our parting shots and possible salty takes. So we'll see ya in a snap. All right, welcome back to the Foxhole. Your faithful host, Ken Harlan here. Ice cold chilling like Kavica Kvaratskhelia. Big number 7 for the Red and Blues. Telling you, game changer ever since getting him January 25. It made the Red and Blues one of the best clubs in the world. Ali Ali. Okay, let's get to some parting shots and probable salty takes to get you out of here on this wonderful Wednesday. Tax Day, April 15, 2026. Let's talk about that. Okay, the Dodgers and Mets are in a high-profile series at Dodger Stadium right now. Always a big deal when these teams, with their lofty payrolls and ambitions, meet. Obviously they've had some incredible battles in the postseason. But the interesting thing right now, to me at least, is the Dodgers are actually living up to their lofty ambitions. Now, you can say they're killing baseball. I argued with, friend of the show, Andy G, yesterday about that, and it's just that. We have to agree to disagree with a lot of folks. When I say that when people get cranky, when it comes to, they're running baseball and a lot of the owners don't want it. And yeah, I really believe that if there was a majority of ownership that really wanted a salary cap, there would be something to that effect, in spite of the players being cranky. We know the players can be broken, even though it's one of the stronger unions, and we talked about this. Where they have like already $460 million, in their war chest, and ahead of a pending strike. But the Mets, the Dodgers are 13-4, doing what they do. The Mets, they've lost 7 in a row. And Mr. Cohen, as we've talked about his lofty aspirations many times on this show, during his tenure owning this club, he can't be happy with, this level of underachieving, right? Because the whole thing is, if you're going to be one of the big boys, you've got to get results. And right now in Queens, they aren't getting results. I got to wonder what's his breaking point, and what does he react? How does he react if the Mets continue to spend a lot of money and not produce any results? Right? Okay. Other New York team, that's having its ups and downs too. They're better off than the Mets, but still, they aren't necessarily, how shall we say? They're not necessarily painting the town. What is that? Well, I don't know what is that? Black and white with the pinstripes. No, that's not really going on here. And made me wonder. There's been a lot of conversation this week about whether or not, if you were Brian Cashman, would you try to get Mike Trout? Colin Cowherd was like, "Oh man, that's the last thing the Yankees need is another injured, aging superstar." He's kind of right. But on the other hand, I sit there and ask myself, there's always a story of somebody getting a change of scenery and being that lifeline. He strikes me as being one of those guys. I know he's had some issues with injuries, throughout his career. But I get the feeling, if I was Brian Cashman, you ain't won since 2009, so why not take a flyer on Mike Trout? I mean, if it doesn't happen, okay. You're already wasting money not winning titles. See if he can be the ingredient that gets you back into the hump and possibly challenge the Dodgers. Just a thought, yeah? Okay. Let me see what else we have here. The Bruising Bruins. Okay, so I've had lots of narratives over time about college football being the colossus that it is, all-encompassing. Talked about Phil Knight basically turning the Oregon Ducks men and women's basketball programs like Red Hot Stepchildren. The impetus on trying to win that natty in football. And I think it's interesting, UCLA talked about the ladies. And obviously they had their moment at the draft where they had like 6 people taken, I believe it is, off of that team. So kudos to them. But other than that, going to be forgotten in like 30 seconds. And I guarantee you, if I asked you who won the women's title, no, I'm not sure. Was it Connecticut or was it South Carolina? Yeah. Now you have the UCLA men's baseball team. And what's so special about them? Well, right now they are ranked number 1 in the country. They are 33-2, and they have won 27 games in a row. And nobody knows a damn thing about it, that it's happening. I mean, it's not a surprise. Like I said, we all know this is a football-driven world. Now, when it comes to college athletics, and I brought this up, and I'll bring it up many times in the future. When it comes to sort of revenue sports and non-revenue sports, I don't know what's in it for you down the road. If a team that can win 27 games, and if I'm not dumbing through ESPN.com looking for content, we'd have no way of knowing. We talked about Oklahoma, women's softball team, and it's this decade of dominance. And in the end, kind of moving the needle maybe 0.37%, right? UConn's women, being extremely dominant. We've talked about Carolina's women's lacrosse and soccer programs. Not move the needle at all. And I've got to wonder, Title IX somehow, well, whatever exists of that, we'll probably preserve these things. But as I said previously, in a profit model, I don't know if that even makes sense. Maybe there was enough cheddar around, and there is, I guess, but we'll see, because football has this voracious appetite, does it not? And for those that can play, I just think that's going to consume more of the resources. And that's pretty sad. But, some of us saw this coming even before I was doing a podcast. I mean, way back early in this century, and I was trying to do a documentary, as I've said before. I didn't quite see it playing out the way that it has. But, I had an idea of something like this, and boy. You remember the Loneliest Monster, one of my favorite, groups from back in the day, had an album called The Beautiful Mess. I don't think this is a beautiful mess. I just think it's a stone cold mess is what I'm saying. Okay. Let's get some Masters chatting here. We'll speak heavily because there's some big news coming down the pike today about Liv. I haven't had a chance to unpack it yet, so we'll save that for episode 310 on Friday. But let's talk about the Masters. No Tiger at Augusta. And like I said last week, that's probably a good thing because, Augusta and that tournament itself, I mean, it's such a spectacle. It doesn't need Tiger. I think Tiger, when there's no controversy, enhances the experience, especially if he can be around all 4 days and be a factor, which probably is never going to happen again. But we didn't need it. We had so many great storylines over this past weekend. I mean, obviously Roy becoming the first to go back-to-back since Tiger did it earlier in the century. Scotty being 11 strokes down at one point, making a furious rally, and he ends up losing by one, where a lot of people this whole weekend, any number of putts made through the weekend could have changed the outcome because definitely the green jacket was there for the taking. Especially after Rory's collapse on Saturday. Because remember, Rory was I talked about it on episode 309 of Fox Trading in a Foxhole. I said, it's Rory's world we're all living in. And I gave him the curse of the foxhole. And, he went out and, had his issues on Saturday. But in the end, I think it was what made this so compelling. Yes, going back to back and joining an elite club, that's something. But not completely wilting like the rest of the field did. I mean, you got to feel for Adam Scott, who he wants this so bad. But as always, couldn't sink putts. So many people, that had their putter been a little bit hotter, it could have been a better finish than it actually, it was a ridiculous finish. But I'm just thinking, some people had made their putts, this could have been all time. Yeah, I'm straight up there. But in the end, I'll give Rory, I think I'll give Rory winning back-to-back the bigger deal by a couple of centimeters. Because I think, you're down 11 strokes and you've got the wherewithal to battle back the way Scotty did. I mean, Scotty was cooking. He just, made too many mistakes at a certain point in the tournament that kind of cost him. But I got to give Rory, where he kind of had his hiccups too. Because wasn't Adam Scott leading up the turn? And Rory knuckled under and brought that shit home. Simple as that. And joins them, a very elite company going back to back. And now we may have a great rivalry with him and Scotty for the rest of the decade, which would be absolutely phenomenal for the sport of golf. Yeah. Okay. We'll leave you with this one. Okay. There was a big UFC fight. I think it was UFC 327, and that was crazy. There's been 27 since 300. And Mr. Olberg knocks out Jiri Prochazka. I can't always, I try to do it twice. But it's Prochazka. It was a UFC heavyweight belt, which should be a big deal in normal circumstances, because you can see where this is already going. Did not move the needle one bit. Once again, if I wasn't looking for content for this episode, who the hell would know that there was a big UFC event in Miami? Right? You always see Dana White out there flexing, talking all this trash. Let me stop that. You always see Dana White out there talking all this trash and stuff like that about, just right, bro bumping and all that nonsense. But I think your product, I have to wonder about it. I've said this ridiculous amount of times. I used to see my feed blow up, hear people I know talking about it. I don't see anybody saying jack about anything UFC related right now. And I think a first round knockout would have really put up in my feed. But I don't even hear the folks that follow combat sports talking about it. And I think that's a bad thing. I mean, there's not even any hype for this big, brawl at the Capitol that's going to happen in June. What's going on there? Who's going to be a part of it? Nothing. I don't. And I keep going back to what Ronda Rousey said. Just like, hey, I'm on the deal right now. This thing's a joke. And she's not lying. And I think that the lack of buzz following a heavyweight title bout speaks volumes about how uninteresting this circuit is right now. Fix it, Dana. All right. Props to Mr. Olberg. You're right. He had a shot at the title, and he took it. Okay. Now, we've gotten to the finish line. Hopefully this time I can get to the edit, and it's not an hour of slow motion footage and go, oh, no, I got to do this again. Anyways, enjoy the rest of the playing rounds. Obviously, CONCACAF, too bad for the Galaxy, just bumped from CONCACAF. Enjoy good food and friends, good time with the people that matter. We always preach that. Stay safe and sane. Always avoid those bracelets whenever possible. In the meantime, keep an eye out for Foxtrotting in the Foxhole episode 310 at the end of the week. I should be having another stream with Mr. Big. We need to catch up here, so expect some more interviews coming up there. Like I said, SJ gets down whenever she wants to release that episode. I'll let you know about that. Always give a like to the FTIN FX YouTube media channel. We need the help there with the algorithm. Till then, keep it tight, keep it real, and can't wait to do this again with you all. Peace.